So let's kind of talk about this year compared to past years. What do you think? Where does it stand?
Well, it's a great question. I think that the best parallel we can have for 2022 is I think this is going to be the new 1992. And what I mean by that is that it was not a particularly active year when we're talking about meteorologically what it was like. But from a perception standpoint in the US, people are going to remember this as being a very active year just because we had one really big, impactful hurricane landfall. So despite the fact that we did not actually see a season that was, hitting those high forecasted totals that were anticipated prior to the season starting, but the reality is how did it actually affect people? And of course, Hurricane Ian with a bullet was a really important event, a very damaging event, and one we're going to be looking back on very much for many years to come.
Some late season action too, though. What about Nicole?
Yeah, Nicole was definitely a bit of a surprise in terms of the rarity of seeing a November hurricane landfall on the east coast of Florida. There's only been a handful that have actually made landfall in the U.S., let alone Florida, going back throughout our history. So that was a bit of a surprise. The good news is that it did not cause as much damage as we initially had perhaps anticipated. But many of the same communities that were affected by Ian, unfortunately, were affected by Nicole as well. So Florida certainly had the target on its back, so to speak, this season.
A lot of noteworthy graphics running around after Nicole, kind of that crisscross across Florida, the storms reminiscent of past years. Is that really rare to kind of see that same pattern of two storms making similar tracks to when they did in, was it '04?
Yeah, I mean it's a lot of it's probably just luck. It doesn't happen too often, but from a historical context perspective, it certainly is interesting to kind of see how sometimes history repeats itself. I was working in Florida in 2004, so I certainly remember that year very, very, very well. But luckily Nicole was not quite as impactful as those '04 storms ended up being collectively together. But Ian by itself, of course, was certainly the main headliner this season.
Mm-hmm. Fiona, kind of noteworthy as well, just because of where it went, correct?
Yeah, Fiona, of course, it went through Puerto Rico and then really the effects that happened in Canada as well. We don't probably talk as much about Canada as we should in terms of hurricane or post-tropical cyclone impacts, but Canada actually is facing perhaps its costliest storm on record with Fiona up there. So it was certainly a big event. But down in Puerto Rico, of course, I think this reinforces again that the wind, of course, is a big deal, but the water component of tropical cyclones continues to be very, very significant when we're talking about risk to life and property.
Yeah, we spoke to you not too long ago about that damage from Ian. What has changed? Because we spoke to you pretty quickly after Ian made landfall. In the past couple of months, has there been just a huge spike in that damage?
Yeah, so it's going to be really a long process as insurance claims continue to be filed. Unfortunately, the insurance market in the state of Florida continues to be in a really difficult position. We're looking at a lot of litigation to come, liability concerns, a lot of these things around the complexities of how insurance claims are filed, whether it's the actual policyholder itself or if they're doing it through a third party. And that really prolongs the period in terms of when claims are actually going to be closed. So we are certainly looking at numbers on the insurance side well into the tens of billion, probably going to be approaching $50 billion on the insured side alone. And we're talking about the overall economic cost. It's probably going to be around 100 billion at least in the US. So one of the costliest hurricanes certainly on record for the country.
Probably an obvious question, but as far as retiring of names, what are you seeing for this year?
I mean, Ian, of course, is just going to be the latest in a long line of I name storms that have been retired. I think Fiona very well could possibly be another one that gets retired, just given the impact that happened in Puerto Rico. But I think Ian is for sure the safest bet.
Last question. We always see that seasonal outlook, that forecast for the year. Is there any legitimacy to that? Do we ever see that pan out correctly?
Well, yes and no. I think that, from the insurance point of view, and I think for the broader, general public, I think it's always intriguing to see what scientists are seeing based on their different type of modeling, getting a sense of whether or not we're going to be in an El Nino or La Nina or ENSO neutral. I think that there is at least tidbits that we can use to prepare, and I think use from a communication aspect to let people know, hey, the season is coming. It's looking like it could be particularly active, but I think we're going to, like I said off the top, we're going to start looking at 2022 like 1992, where it really just takes one storm to completely alter the perception of a season, regardless of how many storms are actually forming and tracking across the Atlantic Basin.